Ladies and gentlemen, it is all pretty clear in the gacha space by now. You've probably seen the hundreds of videos talking about how Honkai Star Rail 3.2 is a very, very dangerous update. The amount of damage that it's going to do to the gacha space as a whole, the predatory practices that it's going to be bringing forward, you can already see even by the dislike ratio that we're seeing on the special program itself. Hoyoverse usually doesn't get ratios like this, and a lot of people are very, very, very upset. And the reason for that is, of course, the fact that Castoricy is releasing. She has a global revive passive built into her kit that is essentially going to provide bonuses whether or not she's even on the field, and is setting forward a very dangerous standard for the game as a whole, for the space as a whole, because who knows what could occur if other companies, other games under the Hoyo umbrella, maybe even a little bit of Kuro Games themselves, right, would implement something like this in their games, basically insinuating that your account is going to get weaker even if you don't have them on your team, because of how it's all working out with those global passives. And there was a bit of a discussion the other day regarding the impact of this update, whether or not it's actually good, people giving their ratings and, trying to stay neutral. And this was a bit of an impromptu gacha cast that occurred between creators. I think I'm seeing a Genizod, a Fob Master. I think I'm seeing a Ruby, a Mr. Pokey, and a Sweetly in here. This was a discussion that people were having about the update as a whole and giving their thoughts, talking about some of those predatory practices and talking about the future of gacha games. And this was one excerpt that I found really, really, really interesting, because it was, in my honest analysis of it, it was an attempt by people to stay way too neutral, despite every bit of evidence, everything we've actually seen from a company like Kuro Games, proving the opposite. But let's just go ahead, let's check this clip out, and let's break it all down.
There's a universe where Wuthering Waves was before Genshin Impact, and they were so successful, and they never have the devs listen moments because they were so
that would not happen.
Yeah, so basically, what you can see from that clip over there is they're talking about predatory practices in gacha gaming, how there are certain leaders in the space, because they have gained market share, they've gone ahead and they've put in a bunch of predatory practices into their games. For games like Genshin Impact, all you have to think about is exploration quality of life locked behind limited banners. You have to think about the double banner that they had for Mavawika and Silali, and then hiding their Lantern Rite rewards until after those two new banners were gone. You have the whole ZZZ situation with rampant power creep with the release of Miyabi. And of course, you have Honkai Star Rail with power creep across the board for their entire 1.x roster. And now the release of global passives, right? So we're over here. We're talking about this entire situation, how a market leader can go ahead and kind of set the standard for predatoriness. And I think the claim from Fob Master over here is,
there's a universe where Wuthering Waves was before Genshin Impact.
And so he's saying if Wuthering Waves were to release before Genshin Impact and reach a critical level of acclaim,
and they were so successful, and they never have the devs listen moments.
If they were successful and they had a positive track record, right? If they made a lot of money, they would have never had the devs listened moment. They would have never really implemented the amount of feedback that they have, because they're like a latecomer to the scene. We're kind of basically weaving Kuro Games into this whole discussion about predatory nature in Honkai Star Rail by coming out with a huge hypothetical that we can neither prove nor disprove. However, there is a lot of evidence pointing towards the contrary. So let's listen a little bit more, and then we'll dive into what I have to say about the matter.
That would not happen. They definitely copied Genshin.
They
copied Genshin so hard, bro. No, I'm not saying they would. I'm not saying they wouldn't do the devs listen. I'm saying they would.
Imagine if Wuwa came first and Genshin came second.
Oh, I think they would do the same thing as Genshin. 100%.
Yeah, so we're basically going in, and then we're kind of just insinuating, we're having creators like Fob and Genizod insinuating that if Kuro Games had simply released Wuthering Waves first, they would have been the exact same as Hoyoverse. That they would have been a company that would not listen, that would not integrate feedback, that would do all of the same exact sort of predatory practices that we know Hoyoverse has done. And they're kind of in like 100% unison, right? And there are a lot of people that believe that, right? You'll have a lot of their viewers going in and kind of like adopting the same mindset as the streamer. But when we take a look at what Kuro Games' track record actually is, I don't feel like this is really a claim that holds a ton of water. And here's why. We all know that Wuthering Waves 2.0 was one of the most successful updates the game has ever had. You don't have to take my word for it, though. You can just take the word of the CEO themselves. Yesterday, after extensive preparation, the 2.0 Renacida update finally launched, and I'd like to share its performance with you. This is from Solon, the CEO. The new version exceeded player expectations, and on the operational side, we're thrilled to announce that Wuthering Waves achieved its highest single day revenue since launch, a milestone for the team. And this is the thing, guys. This is the big thing when it comes to this. They just came off of their most successful revenue patch-wise ever in 2.0. And in 2.1, do you want to know what these developers did? They just came off their most successful patch ever. And you could assume, right, that they might pump on the brakes, much like how ZZZ, after its amazing 1.4 patch revenue-wise with Miyabi, kind of pumped on the brakes for 1.5 and didn't put a lot of features or a lot of new updates, a lot of the things that players were asking for in version 1.5. What Kuro Games did after their most successful patch revenue-wise was they proceeded to add Echo loadouts into the game. They proceeded to add Echo loadouts into the game after they just released their most successful patch in the history of the game. Does that really sound like a company that would, you know, once they have a market share, once they have a lead, once they're above some of the other competitors, that they would just stop innovation, they would just stop quality of life, and they would just stop making the game better? This is a company, right, that has gone ahead. They have a literal track record of, after great performance revenue-wise, they're still putting in quality of life updates that players want that don't help their revenue at all. If anything, this just influences people to farm less and, you know, have less customized echo sets for everybody and like share them more between their units and actually, you know, could lose Kuro money. That's what they're putting into the game. And so this whole idea that we have over here sort of being propagated in this discussion to sort of like weave Kuro Games into the whole predatory discussion when it comes to Hoyoverse doesn't hold a lot of water just from what we have already seen Kuro Games actually do. And that's the thing. That's just from Wuthering Waves. There's a lot of other things when it comes to Kuro Games and a track record that they have when it comes to being free-to-play friendly and listening to their customers. And that is, Kuro Games still cooks with PGR and improves it every single time. Kuro makes infinitely less money on that game, but that's not the case for Wuwa. Why didn't they just give up on PGR after Wuwa blew up? Why spare resources there? They could just migrate it to Wuwa then. If you're not familiar with Punishing Gray Raven, I've actually gotten through a little bit of like the new player experience. I've been able to sink my teeth into the game for a fair bit. One thing is clear about Punishing Gray Raven. It is one of the most generous and like free-to-play friendly games in the space. In terms of how many free rewards they give out, you're able to pull a limited 5-star, or really like their equivalent of a limited 5-star every single patch. Their weapons are like constantly available, blah, 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 all of these things. They already have a track record across their previous games of being extremely consumer friendly, even if it might not be in their best financial interests in doing so. And so we're kind of like going ahead and unfortunately on this call and in this discussion, not really bringing a lot of glue, not really bringing a lot of like evidence to the claims and the hypotheticals that we're making, and just kind of going off of like gut feeling. And when we have like all of these data points that are indicating otherwise, it's kind of like an unfortunate thing to have this sort of like mindset being brought in by CCs when they really should, in my opinion. I really do feel like they should know a bit better because, you know, we're talking about our expertise as Gacha CCs, right? We're talking about all the different games that we've played. I know Fob himself has experience with Punishing Gray Raven. And so I think it's kind of just the mindset of why do we feel the need to sort of like hook Wuthering Waves and Kuro Games into this discussion about predatory nature and then kind of just insinuate that, yeah, they would have been exactly the same as Hoyoverse when we have so many videos, so many personal accounts by Solon, so many like breakdowns of like the journey that Kuro Games had, and we're just ignoring all of that and kind of going down to the whole like root of all evil. It's like greed. Like every company is greedy, and every company, if they had the opportunity to, they would be super predatory and do like awful things, you know, for the players. Yeah, but just because they're playing catch up, they're not doing that. And this is the thing. There are plenty of examples of other just market leaders in the space that have thrived without being predatory, and they're still at the top of the market. And that is, well, I don't know if you guys know this application, Steam. Steam is probably one of the most player-friendly and like consumer-friendly platforms in existence. They like added the ability to like refund if you like have only played less than like a certain amount of time, or if it's within like 48 hours. They're the most successful like game delivery platform in the space. They're a market leader, and all they do is just continually make it easier and better for their consumers as time goes on. They could easily become more predatory, right? They could easily make it far more user unfriendly because they know they have market share. They know that they're a leader in the space, but they continue to be consumer friendly with everything that they do. And they did it from the start to play catch up. And now that they're in the lead, they haven't stopped. And when we have evidence, again, just like kind of like pointing to the contrary, even like within the gacha space and outside of it, that's where people are coming in with this, you know, with this statement of like proof. People are making multiversal theories to shit on Kuro Games now, and we can kind of see why, right? It's like we're in like a fucking Doctor Strange movie where we have looked into the 14.3 million different possibilities. We've isolated one where like Solan's actually like a fucking villain, and then we're kind of like insinuating that that's like the present case. And it's a little bit rough. It's a little bit rough. Again, when we have literal proof, them adding echo loadouts despite performing with one of the highest revenue patches they've ever had, and then their whole mindset when it comes to PGR still being super consumer friendly when they could easily be more predatory. It is a little bit, you know, it does seem like we're trying to play both sides really, really heavily here. And I do feel like it is a fear, right? It is a fear generally across the community of being branded as a Kurobot. But unfortunately, in our attempt to appear like super neutral, we've kind of just like put the blinders on and completely ignored everything that's actually going on in the space and with these games, just because we don't want to be seen as a Kurobot and just because we want to be seen as neutral. But unfortunately, in my viewpoint, right, when you just take a look at some of the responses that we're seeing over here, it's so easy to discredit someone's efforts. Now we're blaming Kuro for hypothetical situations to deflect from Hoyo's bad practices. When other people resort to imaginary situations in an attempt to downplay you, that's when you know you've won. They're really scraping the bottom of the barrel with this one. They'd be like, I'm not going to defend Hoyo, but let's drag Kuro with it. In our attempts to appear neutral, and in our attempts, right, to kind of like sit on the fence and not want to like shill one game over the other, we have basically disregarded reality as a whole and like all of the proof that's actually in the space just because we want to appear neutral. And this level of skepticism, when everything else is proving otherwise, it's something that a lot of people don't really like, because people are just in this whole space of, why are you spouting off all of these hypotheticals? What is kind of like the point when you don't actually know what would happen? Nobody knows what would actually happen, but what we can keep in mind is what has occurred. And the truth of the matter is, this is one of the most player-friendly, one of the most player-conscious developers in the space. And we're kind of like taking the Genshin, the Hoyo PTSD, and indicting, and in a way, indicting Kuro Games for something that they haven't done. And it, in a lot of ways, can be considered a bit of a weird look. And so I think that this is kind of like an unfortunate sort of reality when it comes to Wuthering Waves and everything with it. People are always going to view the updates that Wuwa is getting with like some sort of string attached, right? That there's always something that like, you know, there's a reason for it. Oh, they're just trying to play catch up. They're only doing this because of Hoyoverse. And that's sort of like the framing that I feel like the game is always going to have. And I personally view it as a bit of an unhealthy one in the space, simply due to the fact that, well, if what you were saying was actually true, they wouldn't have added echo loadouts, because again, they just had one of their best patches ever revenue-wise. So why would they ever feel the need, if they were as predatory as people were saying, right? If they were just like as opportunistic as people were saying, they wouldn't have done this. And so with that, hopefully this explains like the whole context over here, like the whole situation that's going on. I think it's a little bit unfortunate. And I feel like people should really, you know, when they're going in and they're trying to have these discussions about the games, I really do feel like they have to keep in mind what the history, what the track record is, instead of, you know, kind of just insinuating things with absolutely no data points at all. So with that, let me know what you all thought about this, and peace out.